So this is the first part of the notes on the solving quadratic equations. And we're going to start off looking at something that should be pretty familiar with solving by factoring. But before we do it, let's look at what's the basis of solving quadratic equations this way. So we're going to look at something called the zero product property. And what the zero product property says, in short, is that if you multiply two things to get together and you get 0, then one of them must have been 0. This is something that makes a lot of sense if you actually think about it. So 2 times what equals 0? 2 times 0 equals 0. Blank times 50 equals 0. 0 times 50 equals 0. So if you multiply two things together and you get 0, one or both of the numbers was 0. So for example, if a and b are two numbers and you multiply them together and get 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0, or a and b both equal 0. Okay, so they equal each other and they equal 0. So if x plus 3 times x minus 7 equals 0, then either x plus 3 equals 0 or x minus 7 equals 0. Okay, and so we could solve both of those and find what x values would make that true. So let's solve by factoring. When you solve by factoring, we want to take advantage of the zero product property. So what we need to do is make sure that we can break each problem up into two things which are being multiplied together and they end up equaling 0. Okay, so we need to have something like a times b equals 0. This usually ends up looking like a plus a number, b plus a number equals 0. And then we'll set up both of those factors to be equal to 0 and solve them. Well, in this one, what we would need to do is make sure it equals 0. So make it equal 0. Well, make this equal 0 by doing the opposite. So you need to get rid of anything that's on one side. Get everything on one side, set it equal to 0, factor it out. So adding 15 to both sides. On the left side, that's going to give me 2x squared minus 11x plus 15 equals 0. Well, hopefully by this point you're starting to get a lot more comfortable with solving, with factoring at least. But big X, headphones, 2, 15, multiply them together, 30, negative 11. Okay, so then you need to go through the possibilities for what could make that happen. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, which would be the correct one. So 5 times 6. Now the problem is when you add those, you get positive 11. So switch it to negatives, negative 5, negative 6. Okay, factor it out. X minus 5, x minus 6 equals 0. So the one trick is going to be remembering to put this equals 0 at the end of each one. Now, divide and slide. So divide by 2, divide by 2. The second one we know works pretty nicely, x minus 3. Okay, this first one, 5 over 2, doesn't reduce, doesn't divide, so the 2 goes in front. We have 2x minus 5 equals 0. Okay, so let's take it up here. Solve both of these equations. Well, going back to the zero product property, here's our two things. So it's like 2x minus 5 is a, and it's like x minus 3 is b, and they're being multiplied together and they're equaling 0. So either 2x minus 5 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. So one of them has to equal 0. Well, solve both these equations. So the first equation, we could add 5 to both sides. The left side it cancels, so we get 2x equals 5. Divide by 2, and then x equals 5 over 2. Reduce that fraction if you can, or switch it to a decimal, but fractions are usually better for answers. Okay, this one here, add 3 to both sides, and x equals 3. Now I want you to look at something. There are some shortcuts which you may start to notice. Okay, one thing is that this answer, 5 halves, is the same number that we had right here, x minus 5 halves, before we slid it for divide and slide. Okay, so that's one thing. If you remember that, it may help you solve a little bit quicker. Okay, the other one, this 3 is the same 3 that we had back from this 6 over 2 from this minus 3, but they're opposite signs based on how you solve equations. So if you keep track of that, it may help you solve some of these a little bit quicker. Okay, Next one, x squared plus 7x equals 18. Well, we want to get rid of this 18 from the right-hand side to make it equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 18 from both sides. Okay, factor this out. Negative 18, we won't need to divide and slide, so it's a little bit easier. Positive 9 and negative 2 work. So we'll have x plus 9, that's your A, x minus 2, that's your B, equals 0. So either x plus 9 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. Solve both these equations. Well, subtract 9 from the first one, you get x equals negative 9. Add 2 to both sides for the second one, and you get x equals positive 2. Again, look at the shortcut. So you don't really have to split it up if you don't want to. This and this are the same number, just opposite signs. So you're welcome to skip the equation solving step if you want. This and this, same number, opposite signs. And it goes all the way back to here. For ones that you don't have to do divide and slide on, that's really going to be your answer just with opposite signs. So you can notice this pattern. Okay, well in practice 1, go ahead and you can pause the video and try to solve both of these. And then unpause it and I'll talk through solving them. Okay, so what you would want to do is subtract 6 from both sides first. So remember, first step, make sure it equals 0. X squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. Well, negative 6 and 1 comes from 3 and a negative 2. So it's x plus 3, x minus 2 equals 0. Do you think you can go and just tell me the answers right from this? Well, you should be able to. Remember, it's the opposite signs for both. We don't need to divide and slide. So for ones like that, it's a lot easier to do. So your two answers, x equals, it comes from this, but we need to change the sign, negative 3. Okay, your second one, x equals, comes from that x minus 2, but change the sign, positive 2. For ones that you don't have to divide and slide, a lot easier. Now this next one, make sure it equals 0 first before you do anything else. So we need to subtract 8x from both sides. So this one is actually a little bit tricky. It's the first time we've had to move an x. 16x squared minus 8x equals 0. Okay, and when you look at factoring it, you could do a big X, but that's not going to be the easiest way. Actually, the easiest way is the type of factoring that we often forget to try first, the greatest common factor. Both of these have a factor of 8x. So if you would divide 16x squared by 8, you would get 2, and divide away the x, and it just goes down to 2x. The second part, 8 divided by 8 is 1, take away that x, equals 0. So that means that either 8x equals 0, or 2x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, regardless, the first one, divide both sides by 8, and we get that x equals 0 as well. Or, the second one, add 1, so 2x equals 1, divide by 2, x equals 1/2. Okay, so that one was a little bit different, a little trickier, but still within the bounds of what you should be feeling kind of comfortable with. Okay, so that's the first example of how we can solve quadratics, solving by factoring. So the key parts were, again, set it equal to 0, factor it out, divide and slide if you need to, set both factors equal to 0, so a equals 0, b equals 0, or like x plus 2 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, and then solve both of those equations individually. Okay, the next video we'll talk about